Hello and welcome to Analysing Speech Flipped Lecture Week 5. In this lecture we're looking at vowel and sagittal section diagrams. So the outline is the tick list for articulatory descriptions, sagittal section diagrams and vowel charts. So let's start with the tick list. For an articulatory description you should include the following: a phonemic transcription of the word, an allophonic transcription of the word, a parametric diagram showing V-lick function and voicing, an acoustic display of the word. If you're doing an exam you don't have to show this, and you won't be doing an exam. You should also include a prose description of the articulation of the word led by the above, mentioning airstream, a vowel chart showing the position of at least one vowel in the word. There may be more than one syllable, so if there is, you need to show more than one vowel, and a sagittal section diagram showing an interesting moment in the articulation of the word. When you are doing an articulatory description, you need to describe the jaw, the lips, the tongue, the velum, the vocal folds or glottis, and you need to describe what these are doing at each stage. You should start and finish with the rest position, and this is something we'll be covering later. So in this class what we're going to do is look at the two diagrams that you'll be expected to draw or otherwise produce for the articulatory description, and these are sagittal section diagrams and vowel charts. Let's start with the sagittal section diagram. A sagittal section diagram is basically a section through the head. We can see one here. It's usually drawn with the nose pointing to the left, and in this diagram we can see articulation of the voiced alveolar nasal. So what we're looking for in a sagittal section diagram is the shape of the head like this, and we're interested in the inside bits basically, but this of course is the back of the neck going up there. We need to show the nose, the lips, the teeth, the hard and soft palate there, and the nasal cavity. We also need to show the bottom lip and the chin. This person's not got a terribly good chin, and also where the it's a little bit odd actually, where the larynx is, and the larynx is down here, and what effect that has here. We've got the tongue here as well, which is, as we know, a very important articulator. So if we look at this step by step, we need to show for articulation of this consonant sound that the tongue tip is against the alveolar ridge, and in this diagram we're assuming that it's also pressed against the side molars, but you can't see that in these sorts of diagrams. You can kind of draw in the teeth in a sort of ghostly way, but I think that looks a bit odd and it's difficult to draw it clearly. In your description you'd have to mention that the sides of the tongue were pressed against the upper molars at the side. So the tongue tip is against the alveolar ridge, and we can see that here. There is complete closure in the oral cavity, so as I said before, it's not just the tongue tip against the alveolar ridge, it's also the sides of the tongue raised against the molars. And the velum is lowered because it's a nasal sound and we want the air to pass through the nasal cavity. The vocal folds are in vibration, and we can show that by drawing a zigzaggy line down here where we're representing the larynx. Pulmonic aggressive lung air passes through vibrating vocal folds into the nasopharynx. So the nasopharynx is this area here, and you can see that there are some arrows already given there, but you may want to indicate the arrows a little bit more than that. And the air is released through the nasal cavity. The next one here we're looking at is a sagittal section diagram of the voiceless labiodental fricative sound. In this diagram we can see that there are a few differences. It's voiceless, so we haven't shown anything going on down here, and in fact we've got a circle down here which indicates that the vocal folds are wide for breathing. Also, we have a raised velum here because we need the air to be under some kind of pressure. If the velum was lowered, then there wouldn't be any air pressure, and we probably wouldn't get the friction noise that we associate with this kind of sound. The tongue isn't doing anything in particular, but we can see that the bottom lip is just touching the top teeth there. So the bottom lip moves to make contact with the upper incisors, and this forms a narrow approximation. And normally I'd want to show a gap. In this diagram there isn't a gap, but we're in this sort of area here, and in fact the lip is touching the top teeth, so if there isn't a gap it's not a disaster for this particular sound. The tongue is in the rest position in the diagram, as you can see. The velum is raised to prevent air being released through the nasal cavity, we can see that there. And the vocal folds are abducted, which means they are held wide apart, and we can see that here, as I said, indicated with a circle to show that they are open. Pulmonic aggressive lung air passes through the open vocal folds into the oral cavity, and then the air is pushed through the narrow gap under pressure, and that's when we get the air turbulence. So what we hear is a short period of labiodental friction. Okay, now what I'm going to do is show you some other diagrams which we can see on the University of Iowa's site here, and I've shown you this a couple of times before in class. I'm just going to do that with it. I don't think we can make it any larger, sadly, but what we're looking at here is our voiced alveolar nasal. And on these diagrams what happens is when you press this, it animates through the articulation of the sound. So, and you can hear the sound as well. Okay. Now if we wanted to show the step-by-step description, we can do that here, and that gives you some information about how this sound is articulated, and as you click through it indicates the different stages, and some of the things it says are quite interesting. So for example, lip configuration may vary depending on phonetic context. Now here we haven't got anything in particular going on with the lips, but if we had rounded sounds before or after, then we might have some lip protrusion, for example. Then it shows us that the vocal folds are adducted and vibrating, so that means they're held loosely together and they're vibrating, and we can see that in the animation of the sound. So watch down here, you can see that it's animating a little. Okay, if we go to our fricative sound that we were just looking at there, if we play it,
fa, fa.
Okay, this time it's with a vowel, but we can see that the velum rises, for example, the bottom lip moves up towards the
fa,
top teeth, and we should see that there's nothing much going on here.
fa.
It's not in vibration, we don't get any animation there. So again, we can click through and see what's going on when this consonant is produced. So in this case the vocal folds are abducted, which means they're not together, and the velum is raised, etc. So it's worth having a look at this site if you're thinking about how to describe what's going on with sounds, and when you're trying to think about how to draw a sagittal section diagram. For your sagittal section diagram in your articulatory description, the knack to giving a good sagittal section diagram is to choose a point in the word where something interesting is happening, for example a secondary articulation. You won't get as good a mark if you just show the articulation of a n, for example, with nothing else going on around it. The whole point of this is to look at what happens when we're articulating sounds. So see if you can find some kind of secondary articulation, or maybe a nasal approach or release, or something that you can indicate on the diagram. For example, in the word few, the front of the tongue is raised towards the palate whilst articulating the first sound. So instead of the tongue in the rest position, we could show that the front of the tongue, not the tip, the front of the tongue is raised up in preparation for the production of the following palatal approximant consonant. We might also want to show some lip rounding. I haven't indicated that the sound is lip rounded in this transcription, but you could show that if you wanted to. Okay, so to practice, what I'd like you to do is draw a sagittal section for an interesting point in the following words. So we've got the words fourth and fell, fourth and fell. Moving on to vowel charts. This is the vowel chart, and you can see it on your IPA chart on the diagram. It's underneath the pulmonic aggressive grid at the top there. It's underneath that to the right. What we can see here is a diagrammatic representation of the vowel space inside the oral cavity. Now this looks quite big, but actually the vowel space itself is very small. So what we're talking about here is, if we're looking at front sounds, for example, we're talking about the tongue, the front of the tongue being used there. So if we think that the front of the tongue is used for palatal approximant sounds, ya, for example, ya, 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 then we're thinking about that area of the tongue being used or being raised when we're producing front vowels like E and front vowels like E and U. We've got the same part of the tongue raised. Similarly, for back sounds, we're actually talking about the back of the tongue. So the back of the tongue, when I'm producing a proper cardinal vowel 8, oo is very raised and back. Not so much for the English sound, as we will see shortly. So what we're talking about is the front or the back of the tongue, or the centre, basically arching towards different targets in order to produce the right vowel sound. Now we also talk about vowels being open or close. So for a close vowel, we're talking about the relevant part of the tongue being high in the mouth, so close to the hard palate. For an open vowel, we're talking about the relevant part of the tongue being low in the mouth. So we're talking about it being far away from, in this case, the hard palate. For back sounds, it's either going to be close to the soft palate or far away from the soft palate. Basically, we're looking at that kind of area. We also talk about vowels being rounded and unrounded. On this chart, that's indicated by the position of different sounds around a spot. So for example here, this is indicating the front close position, the most extreme front close position in the production of vowel sounds. So this is going to be where the front part of the tongue is raised very, very close to the hard palate without getting any friction noise. If the sound is on the left, then this is an unrounded vowel, and in this case the vowel has quite spread lips, like this. If the symbol is on the right, this is indicating a rounded vowel. So this means that the position of the tongue is identical, the only thing that's different is the lip rounding. Okay, try this. We're going to make this vowel E. If I push my tongue a little bit further up, I get buzzing, so I don't want that. E. And now just round the lips, but don't move anything else. E. Love listening to those harmonics. That's the case for every position where we have a spot with a vowel symbol to the left or the right of it. That's indicating that the one on the left is the unrounded vowel and the one on the right is the rounded vowel. And we can see that in all of these positions here and also in some of the central positions too. Some symbols don't have rounded or unrounded variants. For example, for this one we just have a rounded variant. For this one, this is an unrounded variant, and for this one here we've actually got a rounded and an unrounded variant. So what you'd be expected to do is produce a vowel chart and put, in our case, both vowels on the chart, on the one chart. If there's a diphthong, then you need to represent the diphthong on the chart along with the other vowel. There won't usually be more than one diphthong. So what features are applicable to vowels? We can also add diacritics to show that vowels are produced in a slightly different position from what's indicated by this chart. So for example, we can show that vowels are produced slightly further forward in the mouth. This is called advancement. We showed that as well with some consonant sounds. Retraction is where the vowel is made slightly further back. We can also have nasalized vowels. We've been playing around with those, drawing our parametric diagrams. Breathiness, so we did some of that too, where we showed that vowels were produced with breathy voice quality. Creakiness, and we've also shown that where vowels are produced with creaky voice quality. And devoicing, so this is where vowels don't have much voicing in them and can have a complete absence of voice. I can also show length. So we've been talking a bit about vowel length, and this is where we're going to consider it in a little bit more depth. If I have what we call a phonemically long vowel in English, then usually I use the diacritic that we can see here. This is a full length mark, so it's indicating that the vowel is very long. In phonetic terms, we're trying to capture whether the vowel is very long, or whether it's actually not that long, or whether it's actually quite short. We don't do that in the phonemic transcription that we've been using on this course. What we do is we show whether it's phonemically long or phonemically short, and if it's a phonemically long vowel, so the ones in ki, ka, ko, k and ku, for those vowels we give them a length mark to show that they're doing a particular job. And in the variety of English we've been describing, long vowels, including diphthongs, but those with length marks, are allowed to end a syllable, whereas short vowels are not allowed to end a syllable, with a few exceptions where they're unstressed. So if I'm actually using this symbol here and I have it in square brackets like this, then this is indicating that the vowel is produced with a long length, a long vowel. I can take a bit of that off and just have not quite so long there, or I can just take the length mark off altogether to indicate that the vowel, which would be long in certain conditions in comparison to short vowels in English, is actually not very long at all. I can also show that a vowel is extra short, and to do that I use this diacritic here, which looks like a little half moon on its side, this one. Usually when we're doing articulatory descriptions, we use this on vowels that are phonemically short to indicate that phonetically they are even shorter, and we've been putting it so far on where we have clipped vowels, so where they're followed by a voiceless obstruent consonant. We'd normally expect to put this symbol over to show that the vowel is considerably shorter. I can also show more or less lip rounding. I'm not sure if we need to bother too much with this, but I can do that by using little half circles underneath. So if I wanted to show that something was more lip rounded, then I can put this under. If I wanted to show it was less lip rounded, I could put this under. The vowel in horse, in English, horse, has quite a lot of lip rounding, so we might want to show that it's more lip rounded than the cardinal vowel. We'd also need to do some other things to it because it's neither cardinal vowel 6 nor 7. We can also show that a vowel is centralised, and this means it's moved closer to the centre. This could be similar to retracting or advancement depending on the vowel sound, but if you see these two dots above a vowel, it means it's moved closer to the centre. We can also show that a vowel is mid-centralised, and this means that it's not only moved closer to the centre, but it's also moved towards the mid area as well, so it's moved closer to the schwa, if you like. And we can show that vowels are produced with the tongue slightly raised, so higher up in the mouth, or the tongue lowered, lower down in the mouth. I like to think of these as drawing pins, so if a vowel is raised and the drawing pin is pointed upwards like this, then it's sort of going oh, and it's sitting up a little bit, whereas if it's lowered and the drawing pin is pointing down like that, it's a bit like you're pushing your thumb down on the drawing pin. That's how I remember those symbols. If you want to read up on this, Gimpson's pronunciation of English is extremely comprehensive. It covers all vowels in English and indicates how they're produced, what might affect them, how they're produced by different people from different backgrounds, including age, dialect, accent, etc. around the country. And there's a good coverage of the basics in the Roach textbook. Okay, here's something for you to practice with. The English vowel in egg is commonly transcribed with either this symbol or this one. Now we're going to be spending some time before you look at this flip lecture on primary cardinal vowels, so you'll know that these symbols are actually used differently when they're in square brackets. In an allophonic transcription, these two symbols represent two different things. They represent cardinal vowel 2, so this one represents cardinal vowel 2 when it's in square brackets, this one here. So if we have it in square brackets, it's cardinal vowel 2, whereas this one in square brackets is cardinal vowel 3. And the difference is cardinal vowel 2 is E and cardinal vowel 3 is E. That's a difference in quality there, and we'll have had a chance to practice those before you are looking at this video. The English vowel is actually front, mid and unrounded. How can this be shown? By adding diacritics. Now I will admit there's some movement recently in the English vowel. It's a little bit more open than mid, but have a think about how you might want to show that using diacritics if you were going to add them to the basic cardinal vowel symbol. Here's another one. The vowel in horse is said to be mid and more rounded than cardinal 6. So cardinal 6 is O. What diacritics need to be added to indicate that the vowel is produced slightly higher in the mouth? Based on the above information, draw a fully labelled diagram showing the position of these two vowels in English and plot them on the IPA chart. Now you only need to draw the symbols, you only need to write the symbols around the edge. If you want, you can use numbers. We'll talk about that in the practical class beforehand. But what I want you to do is see if you can plot these vowels. You can use reference books if you want to. Vowels in colloquial speech tend to be more centralised than those in exemplar speech or citation form. So what this means is they tend to be nearer the centre of the vowel space, so they could be mid-centralised. Speakers don't always hit the target when they're producing rapid speech. What we can see on this diagram from Cruttenden 2014 are the vowels, the monophthong vowels for English, RP English, and we can see them produced by a male speaker. The citation forms are the white dots, so we're looking at citation forms here, and the connected speech forms are the black dots. Now you can see for the majority of cases that the black dots are more central than the white ones for their targets. There's not always a lot of movement, but they are generally near the centre. We've got something here which is not actually showing that. This is plotted against formant 1 and formant 2. What we can see here are the formant frequencies for female speakers. So again, we've got the citation forms in white, and the black dots indicate the connected speech forms. It's a little bit more random, but very often the connected speech forms are more central. Trying to work out what the target is for some of these. It's quite fun, isn't it? But in any case, generally speaking, the black dots are more central, but we don't always see that happening. Now this is a vowel chart showing the possible variants for the vowel oo in English. So we're looking at the goose vowel. Now we write this with this symbol here. But actually it's not very much like cardinal vowel 8. So cardinal vowel 8 is here, and it's a rounded vowel. That's this one. So we've used this symbol, which is the cardinal vowel 8 symbol, to represent this vowel sound in English. Historically, it's quite possible that the vowel was like that. So if I said goose, it would have sounded more like goose, goose, and it would have been quite a rounded vowel. But for me, certainly, I'm much further forward. Goose, I'm probably more like this. Goose, goose rather than goose, goose. However, we've got quite a lot of variance. We've also got some movement. So some speakers say goose, etc. So we can see a number of diphthongs going on here. So this is a diphthong, this one is also a diphthong, and this is also a diphthong. This vowel here is unrounded, so it's quite near the back, goose, but it's sort of unrounded, which I don't know if that was terribly back. Goose, goose, not very rounded at all. I can imagine Prince Charles saying it like this. So what we can note from that is that oo can be realised with a number of different phonetic qualities. The syllable finally, it may be realised as oo or o, something like that. I'm not doing these terribly well. It's also frequently fronted. We tend to use this symbol if it's a bit fronted but not very fronted, but also you can show that with this diacritic over the top as well, indicating that it is fronted. This symbol is referred to as barred oo, this one here. This is barred oo or barred u. You can even be unrounded, goose can be unrounded, and in fact I've heard so much fronting with this that it sounds more like, well, goose and geese hardly sound any different. Geese, we had geese for Christmas. How many did you have? Oh, just the one. If we look at O, we can see that there are lots of possible variants here. The one I'm going to focus on in particular is this one. Before an L in English, and remember that if a vowel is before an L, provided the L is not followed by another vowel, we get a dark L. There is quite a strong effect on this vowel. The vowel is pulled, if you like, so that the onset is much more open. So we tend to get O rather than O. So it's much more open and back as an onset. But we can see that there are lots of other ways of producing this. So this would be O, and then we've got something a bit more like ow, and then we've got O, so this might be the semi-traditional version. There are some speakers who say in fact I've heard this in Leeds. Somebody asked me if I smoked, but they didn't say do you smoke, they said do you smirk, using this vowel sound. And then we've got or, so you might get this in the far north, for example, and then you get or, that sort of thing going on. So lots of different productions of this vowel, and we can indicate them all with diacritics. This vowel is often realised by older speakers with a rounded first element, so o, and speakers of refined RP may have something more like o. Okay, now I'm going to produce these words here with the O vowel, and I want you to give an allophonic transcription indicating with diacritics what the vowel is doing. So the first one is roll, roll. The second one is Roland, Roland. The next one is goal, goal. And the last one is goalie, goalie. Okay, do some research and draw diagrams for the following English diphthongs, I and ow. How can these be represented using diacritics? There is something in particular that we do with diphthongs which we haven't seen on the diagrams from Cruttendon, where we indicate that the second element is non-syllabic. Oops. We'll get to that a bit later on, but first of all, see if you can work out how to represent I and ow on a chart and using diacritics.